Rent, groceries, Mario Kart, existing. Everything is too expensive. But when I open up Instagram, it looks like people are doing better than ever. The vacations people are going on are cooler, music festival attendance is at an all-time high across the country, and despite price increases, Disneyland is always full when I go. The disconnect between what I'm seeing and what I'm living has been driving me nuts. I feel like I'm missing something, and I don't think I'm the only one confused. So I wanted to actually figure this out, because something here doesn't add up. Why does it feel like everything is so expensive? Or is it that the stuff we need has gotten unaffordable while the stuff we want is cheaper than ever? I also think this confusion, this sense that we're living through two realities at once, might actually be the most important story about our economy right now. Because it explains a lot. Why everyone's angry, why nobody trusts anything. The story touches everything. Politics, family, tech, culture, and we can't solve it if we don't understand it. And as talks about tariffs and recessions heat up, understanding the actual state of things is more important than ever. This confusion also explains why younger generations, especially people my age, seem kind of baffled by the way older generations talk about money. If I have to hear about Starbucks and avocado toast one more time, I'm going to explode. But if you dig just a little into the numbers, it becomes clear. Something broke. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, not just by reading charts or quoting economists, although we'll do some of that, but by following a basic intuition. Life feels off, and maybe we're not imagining it. Now, because everything is so expensive right now, I wanted to give you a great deal. This is a like and subscription to the channel. It's free for you, just for right now. Take it, go ahead. Okay, thank you for that. On to the rest of the video right now. Let's start in the past. We're gonna go quick, so try your best to keep up, or if you set the video speed to 0.5, that could work too, and it gives me more ad revenue. From the end of World War II until the early 1970s, things in America were kind of working. Wages were rising, productivity was climbing. You've heard it before, you could work a single job, buy a house, raise a family, take vacations, you know. The economy was growing, and regular people were benefiting. We built highways, new schools, entire university systems. A lot of stuff just got better. This period is often referred to as the post-war boom. And for good reason. Between 1945 and the early 70s, the US economy grew faster than almost any other period in modern history. The federal government heavily incentivized infrastructure and education. Then, seemingly all at once, it started to fall apart. The 1970s brought a perfect storm. First, inflation, serious inflation. The US was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and social programs, but productivity was slowing. Then came the oil crises in 1973 and 1979. Prices spiked, gas lines formed. Suddenly, inflation wasn't just a data point, it was a lived experience. People's paychecks weren't going as far, and confidence in the system began to erode. The Federal Reserve responded by hiking interest rates aggressively. This brought inflation down, but it also triggered a deep recession. Unemployment soared, factories closed, and a lot of the stability people had grown up used to just vanished. Meanwhile, the US decoupled from the gold standard, letting the dollar float on global markets. International trade accelerated. Production started shifting overseas. What began as a patch to inflation spiraled into a full reorganization of the global economy. In response, Reagan came into office and ushered in a new economic era. Tax cuts, deregulations, union busting, and a focus on individualism. The government stopped trying to guarantee upward mobility and started promoting personal responsibility. This wasn't just an economic shift, it was a cultural one. The idea of a shared American prosperity gave way to a winner-take-all system. Markets became more efficient, but life for the average person, not so much. All of this laid the groundwork for this graph, arguably the most important of all the graphs, in my opinion. This shows the moment where productivity continued to rise, but wages didn't. That's when things really started to break. So what does that mean? It means productivity went up and workers became more efficient. We had better technology, more automation, faster systems, but the money that came from those improvements didn't go to workers. It went to shareholders, executives, capital owners. And as you can see, from 1948 to 1979, productivity and wages moved almost identically. After 1979, productivity kept climbing. Wages were basically flatlined. The chart looks like a fork in the road, and everything we've felt since comes from that split. Let's break that down. Productivity is a measure of how much economic value each worker produces. It's supposed to be a good thing. When we're more productive, we can do more, earn more, and build more. But something happened. As these workers became more productive, they didn't see more money, their pay stayed flat. Why? One reason is how we define productivity. It's not just about how much you make, it's about how much value is created. So if an iPhone costs twice as much as the last one, even if it doesn't take more labor to produce, that still shows up as a productivity gain. The economy says, congratulations, you're more productive, but if the person assembling that phone is still earning minimum wage, that gain never reaches them. Now, this shift coincides with the decline of labor unions as well. In the 1950s, about 1/3 of American workers were unionized. Today, it's closer to 10% and much lower than that in the private sector. So you could argue that loss of bargaining power meant that the workers no longer had the leverage to demand a share of the gains they were creating. The benefits went elsewhere. And then there's globalization. Starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 90s and 2000s, companies moved productions overseas to access cheaper labor markets. It made goods cheaper, way cheaper. I think it's important to understand that. A flat screen TV that cost thousands of dollars in the early 2000s now costs a few $100s. And for a while, that felt like a win. It made middle-class life seem affordable, even if incomes weren't rising at all. But this created a weird dissonance. You could buy a giant TV, but you couldn't afford a down payment. You could get next day delivery on headphones, but your healthcare bill might bankrupt you. Cheap goods masked expensive essentials. Now, I know I've mentioned them a few times in other videos, but I just love this new book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. It's called Abundance, and they're quoted saying, "We have a startling abundance of the goods that fill a house and a shortage of what's needed to build a good life." That's the contradiction. We're surrounded by stuff, but still stressed. Technological abundance has obscured social scarcity. And here's the psychological piece. This situation makes people feel like they're failing. If you have the trappings of comfort, the phone, the TV, the Uber Eats, it feels like you should be doing okay, but you're drowning in rent, student loans, or medical debt. That cognitive dissonance eats away at you. So we internalize it. We think, I might just be bad with money, or I must not be working hard enough. But it's not you, it's the system. Wages didn't rise. The cost of essentials did. And the illusion of prosperity, all the stuff we can buy, has been used to cover up that widening gap. But which stuff actually got more expensive, and why? Let's start with housing. We touched on this in the last video, which you can find here, but it's worth recapping. Housing costs have outpaced wages for decades. In many cities, especially on the coast, rent and home prices have grown 2 to 3 times faster than incomes. Why? Because we stopped building enough homes. It's that simple. After the 2008 financial crisis, housing construction tanked. Developers got cautious and governments didn't step in. And in places like California, zoning laws and NIMBY, or not in my backyard opposition, made it hard to build more housing where people actually wanted to live. The result? Scarcity. And scarcity makes things expensive. But the consequences go beyond affordability. When people can't afford to live near where they work, it affects commutes, quality of life, family planning, everything. It shapes how we live, where we live, and what's even possible in our futures. Now let's talk about education. College used to be relatively affordable not that long ago. In the 1980s, a year at a public university might cost a few $100s. Today, even in-state tuition can be tens of thousands per year. You've probably heard this number, but student debt in the US is now totaling over $1.7 trillion. And just like housing, this isn't just about individual choices. It's about systems that stopped expanding. Take what I would argue is the best state university system in the country, the UC system in California. The last new campus, UC Merced, opened in 2005. Since then, the population has grown by millions in the state, but we haven't added more capacity. At the same time, state funding for public universities has been slashed, forcing schools to raise tuition and admit more out-of-state or international students who pay higher rates. So what's the net result of that? College became more expensive, more selective, and more stressful. The schools realize that exclusivity boosts their brand. The harder it is to get in, the more prestige they have, and the more they can charge. So instead of building more access, we built walls. And then there's healthcare. This one is especially frustrating because the US spends more per capita on healthcare than any other developed country and gets worse outcomes. How does that even happen? A big part of the problem is fragmentation. We don't have one system. We have dozens. Employer-sponsored insurance, private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, marketplace plans, each one with different networking, billing codes, prices, and paperwork. That complexity drives up costs. And because we tie health insurance to employment, people who lose their jobs often lose coverage. Freelancers and gig workers often have fewer options. Even if you are insured, you might face thousands in out-of-pocket costs. So people delay care, or they avoid it entirely. When you zoom out, the pattern is obvious. Consumer goods got cheaper, but the core human need of housing, education, and healthcare got more expensive. And unlike upgrading your phone or skipping the Switch 2, you can't just not go to college, not live somewhere, or not get sick. That's the catch. You can avoid luxuries, but you can't avoid essentials. So, what do people turn to when they can't afford the basics? Debt. It's debt, and a lot of it. In the US, the average household debt sits at over $100,000 when you include mortgages, student loans, car payments, and credit cards. That number doesn't even capture how many people are living paycheck to paycheck, juggling multiple credit cards, or stuck in a cycle of short-term loans just to make ends meet. Debt is the band-aid we've used to cover up the gap between what people earn and what life costs. You can't afford college? Take out a student loan. Can't afford a car? Lease one. Rents keep rising? Put the rest on your credit card. And if you're trying to build a life, start a family, buy a home, pursue a career that requires credentials, odds are you're borrowing money to do that. And this wasn't always the case. In the 1960s, credit cards didn't even really exist for the average person. Consumer credit was something you had to apply for in person, and it wasn't handed out lightly. But starting in the 80s and 90s, banks started offering more credit. Interest rates became a business model, and we began living in what some economists now call a debt-fueled consumer economy. Now, if you watched my award-winning video on credit cards, which you can find here, you know that the original idea was convenience, not survival. But in practice, credit cards became a lifeline. They're how millions of people smooth out spikes in an increasingly volatile financial landscape. Today, nearly half of all Americans carry a balance on their credit cards. That's not by choice, it's because they don't have another option. When rent is due and your paycheck doesn't cover it, the built credit card comes out. When a surprise medical bill hits, it goes on the credit card, and the interest racks up. Now, you may be picking up that there's also a cultural piece here. We don't talk about debt openly. There's shame attached to it. We treat it like a personal failing instead of a structural condition. But if everyone's drowning, maybe it's not a swimming problem. Maybe it's the water. That metaphor worked better in my head. Debt gives the illusion of wealth. You can live in a nice apartment, drive a decent car, wear trendy clothes, and still be broke. And because we now have tools like Buy Now, Pay Later, Klarna, Afterpay, you name it, we can stretch our money even thinner across platforms. If you don't believe me that this is happening, check out Coachella this last year. More than half the tickets were bought on one of these programs. This is the financial equivalent of duct tape. The promise of the American dream used to be that you could earn your way to a better life. Now it feels like you can borrow your way there and hope you pay it off later. So when we ask, is everyone rich or just in debt? I think we already know the answer. People aren't thriving. They're treading water. And all the while, we built a system that rewards lenders more than borrowers. And the deeper problem is that we've normalized this. We've accepted a world where debt isn't just a tool, it's a requirement. And that acceptance has allowed everything to get worse. So let's reiterate. We live in a world where phones are cheap, but insulin isn't. Where you can get 2-day shipping on a 70-inch TV, but wait 6 months to see a specialist. Where college used to cost what a used car does, and now costs what a house once did. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because our systems prioritize the stuff that generates profit, not the stuff that builds lives. We streamlined supply chains for consumer goods. We deregulated finance. We subsidized credit instead of college. And we told ourselves the abundance was arriving, just ignore the eviction notice and look at your iPad. We built a world where the market gives us what we want, and the state fails to provide us what we need. That's it. That's the story of this video. It's why we feel so weird about money, why we feel so disconnected from the data. The market has given us more stuff. The state has given us less stability. And it's made us exhausted because no matter how good things look on the surface, the phone, the TV, the weekend getaway, we know deep down that it's not enough. We're not okay. So what's the answer? I don't pretend to have all of it, but I think we start by reframing the question. Instead of asking, why is everything so expensive? Maybe we should be asking, why did we choose to only make certain things affordable? Because it was a choice, it's still a choice. We can choose to invest in public goods. We can choose to expand housing. We can choose to lower the cost of education and healthcare. Other countries have. We're not uniquely incapable. We just haven't. And I think that's where I'm gonna leave us, not with a tidy solution, but with a direction. If we want a different kind of future, one based on access, dignity, stability, we need to build it. And you're gonna hate hearing this, but it means demanding more from our politics. Rethinking how we measure success and pushing back on a culture that equates spending with thriving. Phones are cheap, TVs are cheap, awesome. But I wanna live in a world where housing is cheap, where it's normal to go to college without debt, where you can get sick and not spiral into bankruptcy, where being a citizen matters more than being a consumer. Because if we've been plugging the holes with debt, it's worth asking, what would it take to actually fix the boat?